Sing it out. Rise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Darkness falls like a towering wall, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. He has heard our cry and has shined an everlasting light in the shadow of the night. Like the sun shines bright, He will be for us an everlasting light, forever by our side. Oh, magnify, magnify the Lord together, exalt His name forever. Come on, arise and shine. Rise and shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. Darkness falls like a towering wall, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. He has heard our cry and has shined an everlasting light in the shadow of the night. Like the sun shines bright, He will be for us an everlasting light, forever by our side. Oh, magnify, magnify the Lord together, exalt His name forever. Oh, magnify, magnify the Lord together, exalt His name forever. Exalt His name forever. Exalt His name forever. There is nothing more that my heart desires than to live the name of He who saved. Come on! There is nothing more that my heart desires than to live the name of Jesus. Well, good morning and welcome to Lifeway. What a great day to be here, amen? Well, I tell you what, it is an awesome day. We had a great service, the first service, and I am so excited that each and every one of you are here. My name's Neil, I'm the worship leader here, and it's just an honor to be able to come together as one body this morning and just glorify the name of the King. If it's your first time with us, we just want to say good morning and thank you for being here. We are so honored that you chose to be at Lifeway today. We're going to hear a great message today, but right before we do, let us just continue to sing, continue to pour out our heart to the King. Let us just give him all of our worship. Let's sing. The head that once was crowned with thorns is crowned with glory now. The Savior knelt to wash our feet. Now at his feet we bow. The one who wore our sin and shame, now robed in majesty, the radiance of perfect love now shines for all to see. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. The fear that held us now gives way to him who is our peace. His final breath upon that cross is now alive in me. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. The tomb where soldiers washed in vain was borrowed for 3 days. His body there would not remain. Amen. Our God has robbed the grave. Our God has robbed the grave. Oh, yes, he has. He is alive.
sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave at your name. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. All these bones to live, all these lungs to sing, that's again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. You silence fear. Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus,
Jesus, Jesus.
Your name is a light that the shadows can't deny. Your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high. Your name cannot be overcome. Shout Jesus. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, 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 Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus, Jesus. Silence fear, Jesus, Jesus. You make the darkness tremble, Jesus,
Jesus, Jesus. That's his name. Jesus, Jesus. Jesus, Jesus. Father God, we come before you this morning, God, and I just pray that as we cry out your name, God, that we just give you all glory and praise. And it's all directed towards you, God. God, I pray the message that you have for us today, God, that we hear you, God, that we understand you, that we see and feel your word differently than we have before. God, your grace and mercy is unbelievable. It's amazing. The desire you have to have a relationship with each one of us. God, we screw up. We mess up. We're flesh. But God, your grace and your mercy gives us a way to come to you, to cry out your name, to give you glory, to worship you, to put you at the center, God, and to let you direct every part of who we are. God, I pray this morning that as we listen to your word, God, that we see you differently, that we hear you differently. God, let us draw closer to you. It's your name we pray. Amen. Y'all may be seated. Well, as I told you just a few minutes ago, my name's Neil. I'm the worship leader here. But before Josh comes, we just want to tell you about a couple things. Okay, a couple announcements for you. One is we have our life group chili cook-off tonight. Who's excited about that? Well, I'll tell you what, if you are in a life group, we want to see you here this evening. We want you to be here. Bring your chili. There's going to be prizes for the top 3. So if you think you have the best chili around, we'll come test it against every other person who thinks they have the best chili around. But also, we're going to have a great game night. We're going to hang out, play games with people in our life group, play games with people in other life groups. If you have kids coming, make sure you bring a game that they can share and play together. We just want to have a great time of hanging out, enjoying some good chili, and playing games together. Sound good? Well, hopefully to see all y'all who are involved in life groups there this evening. The next thing we want to tell you about is our next Discovering Lifeway opportunity. March 17th, right after the second service, there will be an opportunity to participate in our Discovering Lifeway class. What it is, it just allows you to figure out who we are, what we're all about, and where we see God taking us and doing in our lives here at Lifeway. If you want to sign up, you can put that on your connection card that's in your worship guide, and you can drop it in the worship boxes at the back of the room. And we would love for you to come through this if you haven't been to it before, because it really gives you the opportunity to experience connection and just discover life. Just discover what God has for you. So we would love for you to take part in Discovering Lifeway. And now what I would ask is that you would get ready to see a creative illustration of what it looks like to live a life of worship.
Until one worshiper of God responds in obedience. You want to know what a life surrendered to God looks like? You want to know what worship truly is? If I had to explain it, I think I would have to tell you about one of my best friends. A guy that I've spent a ton of time with. A guy that I've been through thick and thin with, Nehemiah. The cupbearer to the king, Nehemiah, the governor, Nehemiah, but more importantly, I'd have to tell you about the worshiper, Nehemiah. See, if you don't know, I, Ezra, spent a lot of time with Nehemiah. I actually co-wrote the book of Nehemiah with, you guessed it, Nehemiah. And I think that his life can be an example of what a worshiper of God looks like. See, it all started in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign. It was late autumn, and Nehemiah found himself at the fortress of Susa. Nehemiah was a Jew, and a Jew living in Susa is cupbearer to the king. And I got to tell you, being a cupbearer to the king in Susa, in Persia, was pretty good. Except for the fact that you had to taste every food sample and every wine that he was going to drink to make sure it wasn't poisoned. And so, other than that, the job had its benefits. But Nehemiah was trusted by the king. He got his own royal quarters. He got to live in luxury, drink and eat with the king, meet other royalty, wear fine clothes. I mean, he had it all. And not only that, but Susa in late autumn was pretty awesome. It was the mid to low 70s. The fall rains were coming in, and they knew winter was coming, but winter didn't really matter to a cupbearer because a cupbearer had a warm bed with a warm blanket in a warm castle. Life was good. One could say that God had blessed Nehemiah abundantly. And I still remember the day. I remember it like it was yesterday. Nehemiah's brother and some of his brother's friends came into Susa to give Nehemiah news that Jerusalem had been destroyed again. 3 times in 200 some years, our capital, our holy city, had fallen, and it hit Nehemiah hard, the words etched in his brain forever. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. If you don't know, Jerusalem is our holy city. Jerusalem is where our ancestors are buried. Jerusalem has a ton of meaning. It was supposed to be where God's people lived. And the state of our city showed surrounding nations how powerful our God was. And since the wall was down, it showed them that our God was weak, and it hit him hard. And not only that, but walls had significance in our day. They showed strength. They actually symbolized peace. But our city had fallen, and the gates had been destroyed by fire. These words echoed in the halls of the castle. You could hear a pin drop. And in that moment, Nehemiah fell to his knees and wept. His city, his people had been destroyed. And in these moments, you get to see the heart of a man. You get to see what is most important to him and what he worships. And I've seen it over and over again. Men picking up sword to run out and spill blood, taking revenge. I've seen men pick up pen to speak lies, to win diplomatically. Glory, fame, money, success on the throne of their heart. But not Nehemiah. Nehemiah was different. Nehemiah did what most men don't do. In that moment of total depravity, total internal destruction, at the thought of his people and his city being destroyed, Nehemiah worshiped. In that moment, he turned to God. And I'm still surprised that he didn't pick up a sword and run out to avenge his people. I'm still surprised that he didn't turn to his king that he served, asking for help diplomatically. He didn't even get angry at God in the moment for not being there for his people. Instead, he asked God, what would you have me do? Not my will, but your will through me on earth. And for 6 months, Nehemiah prays. For 6 months, he wonders, what is God going to do? What should I do, God? He prays and he fasts. Fasts for days, prays for 6 months, waiting on God. Asking God to be on the throne of his heart. God, guide my will, guide my thoughts, guide my intellect, guide my character. What do you want me to do? From September to March, he prays. And in March, God gives him the okay. 4 simple words. Speak to the king. And if I could interject here, I need to let you know that Nehemiah is up against some giants. Not only was his city destroyed, but this king, King Artaxerxes, is the same king that stopped me, Ezra, from rebuilding Jerusalem 60 years ago. And Nehemiah has to go to that king and ask to go to Jerusalem. And not only that, but if the king sees that the cupbearer is upset, well, he could be killed. You don't get to try the food and the wine protecting the king and be upset about it. Here's Nehemiah. I imagine the words playing through his head, speak to the king. I can't speak to the king. Not this king. This king will never let me go to Jerusalem. He'll never say yes, and he hears it again. Speak to the king. With shaking hands and sweaty palms and death as a possible outcome, he starts the conversation. Long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried and is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. I told you the words were etched in his brain. And just like Nehemiah, in my experience, following God is not easy. Following God can be scary a lot of times. It takes faith, and a lot of times faith is confusing. A lot of times God will take you to the ledge, and he'll ask you to jump to show you that he's there to catch you, and that's scary. That he's working behind the scenes while you let him lead you. And that's not to say that you need to go to a king that could possibly kill you to make sure that you have faith. But what I am saying is God says he has a plan for all of us, a work to complete in us. And if you let him sit on the throne of your heart, he will begin to work. And that work is the plan that he has for you in this life. Maybe for you, it's that you're a people pleaser. And God doesn't want you to live your whole life insecure, trying to make everybody else happy. And so he'll start chipping away and chipping away and chipping away at the areas that you don't need. And let me warn you, chipping away is hard. Chipping away is tough. Chipping away hurts. Maybe it's evicting idols. Idols that you've had on the throne of your heart for a really long time, and you've put God on the back burner, and you've been worshiping the blessings, not the blesser. And God is saying, I need you to work through this. I want you to confess it. And your idol is sexual immorality, and you can't do it. I mean, I've got a wife and I've got kids. I'm not saying a thing. Maybe God's telling you to start something that doesn't make sense. It would require you to quit your job. It doesn't make sense financially. It's scary, but the call is there. And if I could tell you, following God is hard. A lot of times it's difficult. And for Nehemiah, it was to rebuild the wall. For my friend Nehemiah, it was to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. And rebuilding the wall didn't make sense. I mean, he was a cupbearer to the king. He's not an artisan, and he had a lot of hurdles to jump through, and most people would hear the call from God and they would freak out. They would say, no, I'm not doing it. I can't. Most people would stay in their palaces of luxury, comfortable, and they would never leave what they knew so well. But not my friend Nehemiah. No. Nehemiah was a worshiper. Nehemiah lived for God, and even though he was scared out of his mind, he asked. And oh boy, did he ask. See, he asked to leave Susa, to go to Jerusalem. And it wasn't just a vacation. He asked to go for 12 years. And not only did he ask to go for 12 years, but he asked for passage of safe travel from Susa to Jerusalem. He asked for the king to write letters to other kings and governors of other provinces so he wouldn't die. And that's a lot of letters. And get this. He even asked the king, King Artaxerxes, the one who said, you can't rebuild the wall, to me, Ezra, for lumber from his forest so that he could go rebuild the wall of Jerusalem that he wasn't even fond of. My friend Nehemiah was either crazy or God was on the throne of his heart. And I have to conclude that God was, because the king granted these requests. And straight from Nehemiah's mouth, he tells us how he was able to do it. He says, because the gracious hand of God was on me. And I should add that that the king didn't just grant those requests, but he actually sent officers and horsemen to protect us along the way. I mean, it was beautiful. Here's me and my best friend riding towards Jerusalem with officers and horsemen and carts behind us full of lumber with helpers. It was a beautiful sight. Until it wasn't. I still remember coming over the hill and looking down at Jerusalem. Beautiful Jerusalem. Still how I remember it when I was there just a little while ago. The gate had been destroyed. The walls were torn down, gaps. The only thing left built was the temple. That's where I left it. Homes were destroyed. People were trying to live inside of Jerusalem. And you could feel the hurt, the devastation, the sadness on the hill above as we looked down into our holy city. And it didn't get any easier to see it a second and third time, and I imagine it was just as hard for Nehemiah to see the city of his ancestors for the very first time in rubble. But instead of weeping at the sight of Jerusalem, something shifted in Nehemiah. And he went from timid Nehemiah to leader Nehemiah. And you could say that he was born for this, or you could say that God was on the throne of his heart, or both. I don't know. Maybe they go hand in hand. But for the first 3 days, we did nothing. We waited. We waited on Nehemiah. Give us instruction, Nehemiah. And you want to know what worship is? Because this side of Nehemiah showed me a whole different side of worship. Where most men would have started working in the name of the Lord, Nehemiah turned to the Lord and waited for his king to give him instruction. Where most men would have started working on the wall, making the wall their idol. Where most men would have let sadness take over their heart, he slowed down and he waited on guidance from his king. And for 3 days we waited. We waited until we snuck out into the night. And we left through the valley gate. And then we went south past the Jackal's Well and over by the Dung Gate to inspect the broken walls and the burned gates. And when we arrived at the Fountain Gate, the rubble was too high for even our donkeys to get through. We assessed everything that we could, and we ended up going back around south to the Valley Gate where our journey started. And the next couple of days were a blur. But I'll never forget that you could tell God's hand was on Nehemiah. He began organizing groups of people to make certain parts of the wall. I mean, he had the sons of Hesenah on the fish gate. And the old city gate was being built by so many different groups of people, the Gibeons, the Mizpah, and that might not mean anything to you. But what he did was have different groups of people with different backgrounds who didn't look the same, working on one project led by one leader, led by one amazing God. It was a beautiful sight. And it was then that I realized this project could only be done by someone who waited for God, who let God lead them, who waited for God's instruction, who let God sit on the throne of their heart. In this moment, I realized this is what Nehemiah was created for. And he was getting to live it. And the secret to living the purpose that he was created for was worship. If you've ever wondered what your purpose is, I would tell you to let Nehemiah's life be an example to you. Because God has already given you everything you need to do what He's created you to do. But the difference between most people and Nehemiah is Nehemiah left God on the throne of his heart, and most people put idols on the throne of their heart, and they let idols lead them, putting God on the back burner, and they never hear from God. And as hard as it gets to follow God, keep following Him. As confusing as it gets to follow God, keep following Him. When He seems to disappear from your current situation, keep following Him. Don't lose faith. Remember the God that brought you to where you are at, that He is good, that He is on His throne, and nothing goes through His hands without Him knowing it. Maybe God gave you a job and it was a good job, and you loved that job and it was paying the bills, but you lost that job. And you're wondering, God, where are you? Maybe you were married and it ended in divorce, and that was the person you were going to spend the rest of your life with, and you're wondering, God, where are you? I thought you were in this. Maybe God replanted you in a new town, and in that town you were supposed to get a new job and a day's wage, and you were supposed to provide for your family, and you were supposed to make friends, and it seems so clear, and then you move to the town and you have no friends, you have no job, and it's a little confusing, and you're wondering, God, I thought you sent me here. And if you're in a season of desperation, hurt, anger, maybe you're just in a season of wondering where God is at, let the final part of Nehemiah's story be an encouragement to you. Because what happens next could have or would have derailed most. What happens next could have made Nehemiah doubt God, made him really question his whole role in this whole thing. See, while everyone was working on the wall in harmony and unison, there were these two men that wanted us to fail, Sanballat and Tobiah. Sanballat the Samaritan, the half-blood, impure enemy. He's the governor of Judea, the region just north of Jerusalem, and some people say that he wanted to be governor of Jerusalem too, over my dead body. He wasn't a pure Jew, and he would never be able to govern such a holy city. And then there's Tobiah, his little hype man, another man who wanted fame and prestige and money and power, another man who chased his idols that wanted nothing good for Jerusalem. And as we're working on this wall, these two men stand behind us mocking us. Sanballat yells, do they actually think they can make something of stones from a rubbish heap, and charred ones at that? And if you could just imagine, you're rebuilding the wall of your ancestors, your holy city, the place where your God is, and His power you think comes from this town, and the power of this town shows how great He is. And these two men are just mocking you. I wanted to beat him to a pulp. And then there's Tobiah with his stupid comment that stone wall would collapse if even a fox walked along the top of it. They stood there mocking us. And to make matters worse, the leaders of enemy regions saw that the wall was half completed, and news spread quickly that the wall is being rebuilt. And now Sanballat and Tobiah are angry, but so are the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites. Everyone wanted us dead. They were angry. And so here we are. A wall half built, with no army, no protection, no trained warriors. And every region around us, surrounding us, wanted us dead. With armies bigger than ours, trained warriors, they could have killed us at any moment. And to make matters worse, this started to discourage our people. They started to complain. The workers are getting tired, and there is so much rubble to be moved, we will never be able to build the wall by ourselves. Things were grim, to say the least. And in the face of defeat with overwhelming odds against us, Nehemiah did not falter. Maybe it was because he spent 6 months praying, that he fasted, waiting on God to know this really was what he was supposed to do before he ever moved. Maybe it was that he spent 3 days in prayer and worship waiting for God to tell him what to do before he started rebuilding the wall. I don't know what it was, but all I know is Nehemiah started handing us leftover swords and spears and bows, and some of the men knew how to use them, but most of us didn't. And half of us stood back to protect the families while the families worked. the fear of attack looming over us, knowing the enemies could come at any time. The days were scary, but the nights were the scariest, knowing that they could come on the other side of the wall and jump over and kill us at any moment. It terrified us all. The kids, the women, the men. No one was without fear. And maybe it was the fear that drove us to complete the wall. Nobody stopped. Nobody slowed down. Everybody kept working. And I still remember the words of Nehemiah to encourage us in that moment. He stood up and he yelled, "Don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord, who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers. Fight for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes." And if Nehemiah doubted God, he didn't let anybody notice it, not even me. He then started equipping more men with spears and shields and chainmail. And by the time I knew it, every single person, kid, child, woman, man, had a sword on their left hip, and they were working with their right. And they kept going from early to late, sunrise to sunset, day after day. Half the men stayed back and guarded, the other half worked. Half the women stayed back and guarded, the other half worked. And we kept going, fear on our mind, expecting the horn to sound, saying that the enemy had flooded the city and we were all going to die. And we kept working. And we kept working. And I'm not sure you get it. I'm not sure you understand. That wall was built well. That wall, I would imagine, would still be standing thousands of years to come. Even though we built it quickly, we still built it well for people to be able to see thousands of years later. The wall of Jerusalem, we will rebuild it. And with a sword in our left hand and a stone in our right, we are climbing up this wall to put stones on the top. It was exhausting. But it was either build this wall or die. And God told us to rebuild the wall, and we weren't planning on dying, and so we just kept going. We didn't even slow down long enough to change our clothes. We didn't even put our swords down to drink water. We knew that if we took our guard down at all, we would surely die. We were exhausted, but we didn't stop. We kept going. We kept working. Fear kept pushing us. And before we knew it, the wall was done. I don't think you heard me. We completed the entire wall of Jerusalem in 52 days, and an attack never came. I wish I could have seen the look on Tobiah and Sanballat's stupid face. And I didn't get to see their faces, but news travels fast, and they were frightened and humiliated, they said. They realized this work had been done with the help of our God, and it was our God indeed. And it all happened because one man worshiped. See, there's so much more I could tell you about Nehemiah, about how we reform the people, how we teach them God's word, how we hold them accountable, how we take a census of everybody inside of the walls. There's so much to share. And I'm sure there's a book that's going to be written about it one day. Actually, me and Nehemiah wrote it. But I was asked to speak on worship and what worship looks like in the hearts of the people who worship the one true God. And Nehemiah is the story that I would tell if I had to explain it. His life is an example of what worship truly looks like, because he could have stayed in the castle of luxury in Susa, living in the blessing, blocking out the blesser, not doing what he was created for, and died a cupbearer to a king, but he didn't. He could have quit. He could have quit when he was supposed to ask the king to go to Jerusalem, when odds were stacked against him. He could have said, "This is too much, I'm not going to do it." But he kept going. And he could have quit when the enemies were closing in around us as we were building this wall. He could have said, "This is too much, God must not have been in this," and stopped right there, but he didn't. And the only reason I think he was able to do that is because he left God on the throne of his heart. He let God guide him. He let God lead him. He had a relationship with God, and he spent time in prayer with God because he loved him, not because it was something he had to do. And that right there is worship. I guess Worship is letting the love that's in you come out of you and doing whatever it is that God asks you to do. So the question I have for you is just one. Is what are you going to be remembered for? Are you going to stay in your palaces of luxury, living in the blessing, saying this is the life of God, and not even really being able to hear God at all, just living your own life and claiming God? Or are you going to rebuild Jerusalem? The Jerusalem that God has placed in your life, the Jerusalem that God created you to rebuild, whatever it may be. What are you going to be remembered for? And I got to warn you, it'll be scary. It'll be uncomfortable. It'll be an adventure. But I know if you keep God on the throne of your heart, it'll be an adventure that you will never regret because you're finally living the life God created you for.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, He is my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, He is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, He is my song. 'Cause you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're
Y'all can be seated for a minute. Yeah. What will you be remembered for? An important question that we all have to answer at some point in our life. Will we be remembered as a worshiper of the one true God, or will we be remembered for someone who played it safe in the castle of comfort? And my name is Mike Rudig, and I am the Connections pastor here. And if it's your first time with us, we're excited that you are here today. And I know this is a little different, a little outside the box. This is not like every Sunday, but Pastor Josh felt God leading him to do something a little different. And wasn't that awesome to experience? To not just talk about what worship is, but to see it, what it looks like, to be lived out. I hope if it's your first time that you enjoyed that, and we're honored that you would spend this Sunday with us. You're our honored guest. And so we would love to get to know you. In that worship guide that you received when you came in is a connection card. We would love it if you would just fill that out and take it to the blue desk in the foyer, just so that we can meet you, get to know you a little bit. We have a gift to just say thank you for checking us out, for spending part of your weekend with us. If it is your first time, this next part is not for you, but for those of us who call Lifeway our church home, it's our time to bring our tithes and our offerings. See, a lot of people, they're like, oh, church talks about money. No, we consider this part of our worship. This is just the worship experience continuing. It's our honor, it's our privilege to be able to give just a part of our resources that God has blessed us with and to worship Him. And so if Lifeway Church is your church home, there's a giving envelope in your worship guide. You can place your gifts in there, and there's worship boxes on both sides of the doors in the back of the room, or you can give online at our website. But whatever you choose to do, we pray that you will do it thoughtfully. It will be an act of worship, and that it's not you're not feeling compelled to give out of guilt or anything like that. No, but it's worship to our God. And so we thank you again for being here today. Be back next week as Pastor Josh closes out our series, This is Worship. You all are dismissed. Thank you.